Cayce's visions would be lost to us today if it wasn't for Gladys Davis. She was a young stenographer Cayce engaged in 1923 to record every word he uttered while in a trance.
She was much more than a stenographer. She really completed the work. And it's because of Gladys Davis that we have the readings today.
I felt an instant attraction to this man. I just trusted him. One day during a reading, he said a string of words, so I was wondering whether I should put a dash or comma or just how to word this. And over there asleep on the couch, I mean, his eyes closed, he said, put a comma between these.
After she took the reading, she then typed it up into a copy that she would send to the person who had the reading. In the interest of confidentiality, all the names of the people having readings were removed and numbers were inserted.
It made no difference to Cayce whether his clients were paupers or princes. He never charged for a reading, relying instead on donations, a decision that weighed heavily on his family.
We struggled financially, yes, all the time. My mother was frequently wondering what she was going to buy for groceries next week, because if he got 2 or 3 readings in a row and he had a little money, he'd buy a load of topsoil for the garden, or he'd buy a new fruit tree. I think my father gave these readings because he felt it helped people, and that's what he wanted to do.
Cayce's great ambition was to open a hospital where his patients could receive the treatments he prescribed in his medical readings. In 1925, he moved to Virginia Beach, where 3 years later the hospital opened. It closed in 1931 in the middle of the Great Depression.
After the hospital had folded and, he'd lost everything, I heard him say that was probably the saddest time of his life.
But in good times and in bad, Edgar Cayce never lost his prophetic touch. In fact, another set of readings, which had issued from his sleeping form in the 1920s, proved so astounding that they still resonate today and may yet turn modern history upside down. For 43 years of his life, Edgar Cayce would lie down on a couch, place his hands on his solar plexus, and fall into a self-induced trance. In this state, he traveled through space and time, foretelling wars, diagnosing illnesses, and, in some of his most intriguing readings, rewriting history.
When we consider Edgar Cayce's predictions, it's also interesting to look at some of the retrocognitive statements he made, looking back into history and making statements about things you wouldn't find in the history book.
Cayce seemed to know secrets about the past that only high-tech instruments and years of excavating could reveal. Long before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, he spoke of an ancient sect of Judaism, the Essenes, which experts of the time believed was made up exclusively of men.
Edgar Cayce spoke about the Essenes as a community that included men, women, and children.
The experts remained dubious, but in the 1950s, years after Cayce's death, skeletons of Essene women were unearthed near the site where the scrolls were found.
With geology, there are some interesting things as well. Cayce suggested that at one time the Nile River flowed in the opposite direction and actually emptied directly into the Atlantic Ocean.
Amazingly, in the 1980s, satellite images from the space shuttle revealed unknown river valleys beneath the driest parts of the Sahara. More imaging and on-site exploration have demonstrated that the Nile may indeed have once flowed through the desert and into the Atlantic.
In Edgar Cayce's lifetime, much of what he said about lost civilizations, ancient worlds, was regarded as science fiction. It really wasn't until this century, and literally the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that people have begun to look much harder and realistically at these readings as perhaps, well, maybe these aren't so far-fetched.
Probably the most intriguing readings Cayce gave were on the subject of the lost land of Atlantis.
Atlantis, from Edgar Cayce's perspective, was the first great Eden on the earth. It predates the Eden that we know of between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Eden of Adam and Eve. Edgar Cayce saw Atlantis as a massive continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, the individuals that populated the area had a deep understanding of the forces of the universe and could actually harness some of these powers to use devices such as flying machines and crystals and so forth.
But according to the readings, the Atlanteans abused their power over nature. As a result, Atlantis disappeared in a cataclysmic disaster some 10,000 years ago. Cayce's most specific prophecy in terms of date asserted a part of Atlantis would rise again in 1968. It didn't. But that year, a strange formation known as the Bimini Road was discovered in the Bahamas.
Most geologists think it's beach rock. Beach rock is rock that fractures parallel to the shore. Well, this is parallel to the shore, but the end of it curves around in a kind of a J shape, so that's unusual.
No conclusive evidence has yet been amassed that proves Atlantis lies beneath the Bahamas. But according to Cayce, Bimini isn't our only link to the lost continent. Before the final destruction, he said, Atlanteans hid records of their earliest history in other locations.
One was in the Yucatan Peninsula, the other was off the right front paw of the Sphinx in Egypt.
In the early 1990s, Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor of geology at Boston University, conducted geological and seismic surveys on the Sphinx.
I was not in the business to support Edgar Cayce or any other, I'll call him psychic or prophet. I really knew nothing about him other than his name.
Schoch and his team were about to make an interesting discovery.
We were able to model what was underneath the Great Sphinx. We found under and in front of the left paw of the Sphinx what I believe is a major chamber, maybe up to 25 meters below the surface. Based on its regularity, it looks like it was human carved, and not only is it definitely there, but it seems to have something in it. The way it resonated, the way it ringed, seems to indicate there's something in the chamber.
Is it the Atlanteans' Hall of Records that Cayce spoke of? No one has explored the matter further, and as fascinating as they are, Cayce's Atlantis prophecies have so far not been vindicated. However, it is possible that Cayce's method and not his material will have the most far-reaching effect on our understanding of ourselves and the world we inhabit. In fact, he suggested that with practice, we could all do what he did.
I do not believe there is a single individual that does not possess this same ability I have. If they would only be willing to pay the price of detachment from self-interest that it takes to develop those abilities.
Cayce was even able to describe where he got the information that came to him in trance. He said it came from the subconscious mind of the individual he was reading for, and from the Akashic records, a universal source of knowledge that holds all the pasts, presents, and unfolding futures of mankind.
Edgar Cayce said, ultimately, when you view it from the highest dimension, there is no time and no space. There is no future and no past. It all is occurring in one fascinating moment of expression, but time is an illusion that has purpose.